Welcome to the Covid-19 podcast, proudly brought to you by the Namibian.
Good day and welcome to the COVID-19 podcast. This is the podcast that brings you discussions about the COVID-19 pandemic, discussions that debunk myths and facts and anything that's misleading surrounding the COVID-19 pandemic. We do try to bring in credible sources or people who are fit to comment to this situation. People like the over so resourceful Mr. Frederico Link, the fact checker, and also the editor of Namibia Fact Check. Mr. Frederico, it's good to have you today on this, particularly on this edition of today's COVID-19 podcast. How are you doing today?
I'm good, and yes, it's good to be a Namibian today.
Yeah.
Following the big race at the Olympics, I think that has given all of us a bit of a lift in our step today. In these tough circumstances and tough times that we're in. So I mean, it's I feel good.
Yeah, it's good to finally have a front page that has nothing to do, a front page story that has nothing to do with COVID or anything misleading, hey?
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Yeah. All right. Okay. So today, unfortunately, we are going to talk about numbers. There's a saying that goes as women lie, men lie, but numbers don't. But unfortunately, that saying does not qualify when it comes to numbers that have something to do with COVID-19 related numbers. And this is what you speak about in your article, in your latest article titled "Misleading Numbers." What are we talking about here? Are numbers not supposed to be credible?
Yeah, I mean, look, people make up numbers, and we've seen this with the pandemic. The disinformation and the anti-vaccine falsehoods. They always contain numbers. Whether it's about deaths, whether it's about infections, whether it's various other numbers. So numbers are used to mislead and to misinform by these anti-vaccine and COVID denying propagandists. So that's basically what I'm getting at. And this was brought about because of a post that was widely shared in WhatsApp groups here in Namibia about the side effects of vaccines that are being used in Britain, in the UK. And the post had a lot of numbers in there about adverse events that people reported after they were vaccinated, and it's basically just a bunch of numbers put out with medical conditions, saying these are the numbers of people who have suffered these various medical conditions or adverse effects after having been vaccinated, and it's basically to scare people. Talking about things like blindness and deafness and other sorts of effects that the vaccines reportedly have on people. So, it's about scaring people. That's what the disinformation is about. It's about scaring people into not taking vaccines.
Using numbers.
And that's what this post was about.
Okay, maybe before we link it, I try to relate it to the Namibian context. I just want you to speak more on the VAERS abuse, the U.S. Vaccine Adverse Event Reporting System that has also been abused as you speak. How was it abused, and how did you come of it?
Well, I mean, that system has been part of the anti-vaccine narratives since early in 2020. I mean, for more than a year now, we've seen the anti-vaccine narratives linked to the VAERS system, that vaccine adverse reporting system of the US, and to say that look at these rising numbers of people reporting adverse effects after having been vaccinated, thousands and thousands of people, and deaths as well. And so this has been abused, and people not and most people and we've said this before in these podcasts, most people don't actually go and take a look themselves at what the health authorities, for instance, the CDC and the FDA in the US, say about the numbers, and why these numbers are being might be taken at face value, are most probably misleading, and shouldn't be cited as as factual or credible numbers. So I mean, there are explanations there that would immediately provide context and make perspective and make people see, look at, you can't just say 12,000 people died because of a vaccine or vaccines. There are other issues here around those numbers that need to be looked at, and that's one of the issues. And now, in now we see the same sort of abuse by anti-vaccine propagandists, the same sort of abuse being directed at the UK's yellow card system, which also reports sort of it's also a platform where people who've been vaccinated can report adverse effects following a vaccination. And not just COVID-19 vaccinations, all vaccines, So these aren't just for COVID-19 vaccines. These are systems that predate COVID-19. They were in place before COVID-19 came. But they are now being abused by these anti-vaccine propagandists to say, look, these COVID-19 vaccines are poisonous and dangerous, and look at the adverse effects and numbers that people are reporting. And they're trying to scare people with numbers. But the numbers actually, if you put them in context, the numbers tell a different story. And that's the point. People should be careful of just, jumping to conclusions because they see some numbers in a Facebook or in a WhatsApp post.
Okay, Mr. Frederico, I've been listening to the national radio. I think a couple of days back, I listened to national radio, and people complain a lot about you see, the government or the health authorities, the way they announce deaths, most now they've added a new feature of saying whether the person's vaccination status or not. So now the way that system goes, and of course it also becomes a figure as to the person who died is a statistic, and then also the fact that they died while they were vaccinated with the first jab is also a statistic. So why I'm putting this to you is I want to reach at a question that reads as how can the country also relate to this article or to what you're speaking here in terms of this, because we're already seeing people who are using the fact that even there is no the government did not pronounce themselves as to what was really the cause of death in terms of the link between vaccination and death. But people are already concluding because there's a number that says this person is a person number what died because of the vaccine without even concluding. So how can we relate to this situation as a country and in terms of what we're doing?
Yeah, I think, that's where we have to, as media people, we have to report these things responsibly, and as government officials, the health authorities have to announce these figures responsibly, and explain what they speak to. So if we say, if for instance on the daily update we have the figures for this breakdown where so many infections, and this percentage were of people who had at least one vaccine dose. And it's really, like 1% mostly, a very small percentage of people who have these breakthrough or these infections, even breakthrough infections of people who've been fully vaccinated. Very, very small percentage, fractions even. So they are announcing that to make people see, I think, that even if you're vaccinated, you've just had one dose, or you're fully vaccinated, you've had 2 doses, given the situation, the Delta variant situation, you can still become infected. And then when it comes to deaths, for instance, that um, these are people who have been vaccinated, but they've died. And then it's for us, and then it's to make clear, to clarify for the public, the person, if you look at a lot of these deaths, person had comorbidities, person had health issues, most of these people who have died following vaccination have died, um, uh, were elderly people, very old, and had underlying health issues. And to make it clear that there is no proof that the vaccine played any role in the death, in this person dying. This person probably would have died anyway, but and so the vaccine couldn't save them, couldn't help them, couldn't protect them. So to make it clear to the public that it's not the vaccine or that person took, it's COVID-19. It's not the vaccine that caused the death. So I mean, we have to be responsible in how we communicate. These sorts of numbers. We have to be sensitive to the information we are providing to the public. And that's, I mean, something that we try and do at Namibia Fact Check, to put the numbers and that we see in context, to communicate in a way that makes it clear that that removes these sorts of issues of understanding and that might lead to a misrepresentation of what we're saying, or misleading, or misunderstanding of what we're trying to communicate. So it's really about how we communicate these numbers, that I think would set people at ease, and not just to give them numbers and statistics, and then for them to make of it what they will. Most people, aren't all that comfortable or confident with numbers and so on. So you do need to explain these things, and as I said, I mean, we need to communicate responsibly with these sorts of numbers.
And before we go to the second last question, time is not on our side. Maybe what do we need to say to address the people who are now, these days, we've seen a lot of experts in statistic analysts, a lot of scientists, expert. I don't know. I don't know who we need to go to answer these questions. Why now all of a sudden, we have a lot of statisticians, we have a lot of engineers. What is happening, and maybe what do we need to do? I mean, we are having this podcast every time we are having radio stations involved. What more needs to be done so that we can change the mindset, not even the mindset, change the way the way people are looking at these things per se?
That's an interesting question. But I mean, we've seen this throughout the pandemic since early last year, where people have just been, we had all these people making charts about what's happening, and putting out numbers, and confusing people, confusing many people around the world. And the people who were doing this were experts in their fields, but they weren't experts in this specific field, in virology, in epidemiology. So we saw a lot of people putting out charts and making predictions, and based on their charts and their models and that sort of thing. And a lot of that stuff turned out to be wrong. And people at the end, towards the end of last year, people were starting to say, what, why do all these people think, they're so clever? Why don't they just stop doing this? They're confusing the public.
Yeah.
Why do they need to make these projections with their charts and their and their tables and things? Why? they should just stop. They're confusing the public. They're misinforming the public. They're creating, they're polluting the information and the communication space. But these people, so a lot of these people just continue doing this, and continue and a lot of that has found its way into our social media spaces, where you see people on social media citing these figures and posting these charts and tables and all sorts of things, and we see this around, sort of potential treatments and things. I mean, a lot of the ivermectin stuff we're seeing on social media, it comes with these figures, and a lot of these figures now have been, a lot of these studies that post these figures, that contain these figures and so on, have now been debunked and have been retracted by the journals that have published them and so on, because there are problems with the data and so on. So there's been a lot of abuse of figures and statistics throughout this pandemic, and it's confused people. So how do we
Yeah.
how do we deal with this? I mean, I don't know. I mean, the people
that's the
who
thing.
are out there producing a lot of this stuff, they're not stopping. They're just continuing. They're not apologizing. They're not, correcting themselves and the information they've put out. They just continue going. So I mean, we just have to tell people, look, these are the real figures. These are the credible figures. These are the facts. Please don't just believe anybody who comes along and says things that might appeal to you.
Yeah.
That might speak to what you want to hear. So I mean, we just have to communicate, comprehensively and responsively, the facts, and make it clear what's happening, and so on.
Yeah. And
because others out there are invested in spreading falsehoods and spreading a certain narrative that fits their
agenda.
their idea of what is happening.
Yeah, and I have to stress, we've said these things before on numerous podcasts that Mr. Frederico and I have spoken most of the time, and sometimes we are even now sounding redundant, because most of these things is what we are saying. Check your sources, fact check if it's being debunked, question your thoughts in terms of how you react to it. All of these things are some of the things that we've been speaking about. But like I said, time is not on our side. Another misleading number, and also again, redundantly, I'm going to put this to Mr. Frederico again. Another misleading number that has come on the forefront when it comes to this topic is the number of years it took the vaccines to be produced, especially the COVID-19 ones. I mean, it took COVID-19 a year to be produced, but we don't have one. We have 0 years for the HIV vaccines, and other vaccines took a lot of time. And maybe let's just get back. Let's just reflect back, and let's just debunk that one again, as we please briefly, because time is not on our side.
Yeah, I mean, we're talking about different sort of viruses here, and you with this particular SARS-CoV-2 virus, you can, it's similar to other SARS viruses that have already been that have already emerged over the last 20 or so years, last 2 decades or so. So a lot has been learned from those viruses, that helped with developing the interventions that are now being rolled out. For instance, the vaccines for this specific SARS virus. So a lot of lessons have been learned in the past, and the vaccines that have been produced are vaccine technologies and methods that have been tried and tested. So and the technologies have improved since the previous SARS outbreaks and so on. So all of that played a role in how quickly it was possible for pharmaceutical entities to create vaccines this time around, and the amount of focus and government support and all of these regulatory support and money being made available and so on. So all of these things played a role. Whereas, on something like HIV, all of that, wasn't really there. And the virus is completely different. For instance, the Sinopharm vaccine that we use here is an inactivated virus, a vaccine. Now, you can't use an inactivated HIV virus to make a vaccine.
Yeah.
You're going to infect people. If they've tested this, they've seen that that vaccine technology will not work with HIV, because if you do that, you're going to infect people with HIV. So you can't, it's a different virus. It works differently. And it's much more difficult to make a vaccine for that specific virus than it is, for instance, to make a vaccine for a SARS virus. So that's the situation, and these explanations are out there. People can go and read up about them and get the information. They are explained very simply and clearly, by the World Health Organization on the Johns Hopkins University COVID-19 pages, on various other credible by various other credible sources through their websites. The stuff is explained why this has happened. So I mean, these are the information is available, and we keep pointing people to the information and to these sources and telling them, these questions have answers that have already been provided. Don't need to become emotional about a social media post. There's no need for that. You can just find the answer which is available, and it's available and accessible online.
Find the answer which is available, and it is always accessible online. And on that note, I would like to end it there. Mr. Frederico, thank you very much for taking out your time, as always, to do this today.
It's always a pleasure, Enoke, and I think we have to continue doing this, because I mean, already in South Africa they're predicting a fourth wave in from October through November this year. And I think, I mean, for us, seeing as how we so closely follow the trends of South Africa, we might also be seeing a fourth wave towards the end of the year, from October through December this year. So, we need to continue saying this, because we'll continue seeing, the falsehoods and the hoaxes and the conspiracy theories spreading as this pandemic keeps going.
Right.
So it's always a pleasure to talk to you about these issues.
All right. Thank you very much again. If you have questions regarding the topic that we spoke about today, or anything that has something to do with COVID-19, or anything that's not clear to you, Mr. Frederico will be available at the end of this podcast, when the radio stations are going to be talking to him. So you are welcome to ask your questions as well. Do engage with him. Do engage with the radios, so that you can get the clarity that you need in case you still have any doubts. This is why we are doing this. This podcast was proudly brought to you by the Namibian newspaper in collaboration with the Namibia Media Trust, as well as the Open Society Initiative for Southern Africa. My name is Enoke Kaumba. It's been a pleasure doing this with you. Let me end by saying this: a lie told 1,000 times becomes true, but the truth will always be the truth. Thank you very much for listening. Until next time, bye-bye.